Hello, and welcome to the podcast's Early Christian Texts, the Bible, and Beyond. We explore historical and spiritual questions about Jesus, gender, women, salvation, healing, and the meaning of life. Shirley Paulson is hosting a series of conversations with scholars who are able to unlock mysteries from extra-canonical books, forgotten scriptures, so-called Gnostic Gospels, and the Bible. And for those of you who love our Bible and Beyond podcasts, would you please consider becoming a supporting member of our Patreon page? Go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to join at any level just right for you. And now, here's Shirley Paulson.
It's a real privilege to be able to introduce our guest scholar today, John Dominic Crossan. He's probably well known to many of our listeners, and we could spend the entire podcast talking about his remarkable accomplishments. But there are some details that are pertinent to our conversation today. He's an Irish-American biblical scholar with 2-year post-doctoral diplomas in exegesis from Rome's Pontifical Biblical Institute and in archeology from Jerusalem's École Biblique. He has been a mendicant friar and a Catholic priest, a co-chair of the Jesus Seminar, and a president of the Society of Biblical Literature. His focus, whether scholarly or popular, whether in books or videos or lectures, is on the historical Jesus as the norm and criterion for the entire Christian Bible. He sees in Jesus nonviolent resistance to the Romanization of his Jewish homeland, which is mostly what we want to talk about today in our current Bible and Beyond series on the Jewishness of Jesus. So welcome, Don. It's so great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Shirley. Again, for me too, a pleasure.
Great. Well, you have another new book out now, Render Under Caesar, The Struggle Over Christ and Culture in the New Testament. And I'd like to talk about it because I think it'll give us such an important context for our current Bible and Beyond focus on the Jewishness of Jesus. You make the point that Jesus was right in line with Jewish opposition to Rome in so many ways, including the acculturation to Rome. And the followers of Jesus were either going to dominate the world or else they would be subsumed by Roman culture. But you propose that Jesus himself responded with a different approach. Like Jesus resisted Rome, but he did it with nonviolence. So the approach you take in your book toward the meaning of Jewish opposition to Rome is rather intriguing, I think. And your point that their resistance was not merely a political one or even a military one, but is all-consuming, and you call that acculturation. So maybe you could start off by just describing what that is. What does that mean?
Okay, I know don't think it's something weird, scholarly we've just discovered. Acculturation is going with the flow of your culture. If your culture tells you something and you grow up and everyone tells you this, then you're acculturated.
Okay.
I mean, you don't know you're acculturated because you think that's reality. If I grew up in Ireland, for example, and everyone told me the British were bad people, I take that for granted. That's acculturation. Then maybe the day comes I begin to meet some British people. Wait a minute, they're not bad. So how? So now there's a challenge to my acculturation. That happens all the time if you make the mistake of thinking.
Okay. Well, you made it really simple. So you make me not afraid to get into some scholarly discussions that we're going to make sense out of. So that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Now, maybe you could also give us a little context about why Jews were resisting the world of the Romans during his lifetime and what the problem with acculturation would have been then.
Well, Rome was an empire. And
Okay.
if you figure 1,000 years for the Western Empire, counting from with something like a ford on the Tiber, and 1,000 years for the Eastern Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, to disguise the fact it was the Roman Empire in the East, 2,000 years. Now, that's a long span for an empire. I don't think we're going to make it, for example, but 2,000 years. In the generation before Jesus, we call it, let's put a date on it, 30 BCE as a word. Rome arrived in the Jewish homeland. And if you look at a nice map of the Roman world, it looks like a flattened donut around the Mediterranean. Rome was not acquiring land just because it wanted everything to be red on our maps around the Mediterranean. It was globalization. Romanization was Mediterranean globalization. And over there to the east on the Levantine coast between Syria and Egypt, the great breadbaskets of the Roman Empire, we have this little strip of land called Israel. Now, it's not really of great value to the Roman Empire. It's not like it has huge mineral resources like, say, Spain. But it's important because when they can't sail, they can go from Egypt to Syria. So Romanization is a context of Jesus's life. It's the air he breathes. He could, whatever he thinks about it, that's his acculturation, if I can go back to that word. He's stuck there. If he had grown up somewhere else, who knows? But Romanization is the context of Jesus. Now, what do the Jews in the Jewish homeland who are under Roman acculturation or Romanization, to use a simple word, I mean, their holy scriptures tell them the land belongs to God. And God has distributed it fairly, according to Leviticus, among all the tribes of Israel. In fact, God in Leviticus says, the land belongs to me. You're all tenant farmers and resident aliens. And Roman Empire would say, no, excuse me, the land belongs to us. We took it from you. It's called conquest. And if you like to get theological, our Jupiter took it from your God. So we're here. So there. And what are you going to do about it? So that's the challenge of Jesus. And he can't avoid it. So that raises the questions. What are the options, at least the general mainline options, under Romanization?
Okay. So then you talk about Jesus and his unique kind of resistance to this. Maybe we should understand, to get into that, the difference you make between the world of civilization and the world of divine creation. Does that fit in there like that?
Yeah, let me hold that for a little bit, because I want to be very careful with the word you used, is unique. Because the first time, leave out the New Testament for the moment. If we didn't have the New Testament, we'd have Josephus, who was a Jewish priest, actually, who both defended Rome against the Jews in the Great War of 66 to 74 in his Jewish war, but then defended Jews to Rome in the Jewish antiquities. So he's a fascinating character. And when I first read him, that was in the 50s, a little time ago, last century. When I first read him, I thought, wow, this is like reading Irish history. It's the same stuff over and again. The Irish against the British Empire, the Jews against the Roman Empire. They've got collaborators. We had collaborators. They had traitors. We had traitors. They had violent resistance. We had violent resistance. And they had non-violent resistance like we had, say, with Daniel O'Connell. Now, wait a minute. Slow down everything. Because I thought what I knew was that the Jewish people had risen up against Rome violently, of course. They did it in 4 BCE. They did it in 66 to 74. They did it in 115. And they did it again in 132. Wow, I knew all that. But what's also there, programmatically there, not just because I like it, is what Josephus calls the fourth philosophy. He doesn't even want to name it. It's non-violent resistance. Forget Jesus. Jesus doesn't exist yet. Well, he's been born, but he's doing nothing except being a baby. We're talking about 6 CE. This is when, I'm going to use the term quite deliberately, as far as I know as a historian, certain Jews invented nonviolent resistance. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about programmatic, large scale, sit down here and won't move, and you can kill us if you want to kill us, but you'll make martyrs because we won't fight back. Now, these 2 strands are going on. This is what I want to insist on.
Yeah.
there is nothing unique about Jesus, as if even as a Jew, he invented nonviolent resistance. When he grows up and is a young man, let's say in round numbers, around the late 20s of the first Common Era century, there is in his culture two options. One was to plan a violent revolt against Rome. That's a possibility. We did that in 4 BCE. Didn't go too well, but who knows?
Yeah.
And I understand that. That's people like my own background in Ireland. You rise up against an empire again and again and again and again, and each time you lose until one time you win, if you're still alive. Okay, I understand that. But there's also in Josephus this non-violent resistance, programmatic, and it's in Josephus. It's not secret. He has it against Pilate. He has against Caligula. So Jesus is, as it were, of course he's a Jew, but it's not enough to say Jesus is a Jew. It's absolutely accurate, inadequate. What type of a Jew was he?
Okay.
That's the next question. And for that, you don't go just into the New Testament. You go into Josephus and say, what options were there for a Jew in the first century? And even if we had nothing, by the way, about the New Testament, we would know from Josephus there was a guy called Jesus, and he had something to do with this nonviolent resistance. We'd be footing him in. Where does he fit into this? And that's part of the Jewishness of Jesus. It's not enough to say he was a Jew.
Yeah.
I find that condescending, as if every Jew in the first century was exactly like everyone else. And once you've said he's a Jew, you've begun the story. You haven't finished it. And
That's
the huge
beautiful.
difference is that.
Yeah.
I find it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much for helping us to get the Josephus context there. So then does the world of civilization, the world of divine creation fit in there yet? Or is that later than?
No, I think because if I could have just said that it's accurate but inadequate to say Jesus is a Jew without following what type of a Jew.
Yeah.
It's equally accurate but inadequate to say that Jesus, or any other Jews for that matter, were against Rome.
Okay.
As if maybe it was because Rome was pagan.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were a Jewish empire, they'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
What you're asking really is whether God finds something, their God, the biblical God, finds something inherently wrong about empires. Even if they were very kind, you could imagine it. And this goes back to the book of Daniel, 150 years before Jesus, looking at the empires they know. And the Jewish people knew empires very, very well. Yeah. I mentioned the Irish. They only had one empire to deal with. The Jews had to deal with the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and then along come the Romans. I mean, your whole experience is empires. Every one of them has their boot on our neck. And the reason for that, of course, is, as I said, location. Yeah. They're in the linchpin of the Mediterranean, holding Africa, Asia, and Europe together. It's not a good place to live.
Wow.
If you think of it as a land flowing with milk and honey, yep, but it's also flowing with blood and conquest. Yeah. It's a dangerous place to live. So I'm not surprised at what happens. Now, they're seeing something bigger than the Roman Empire here. It's not like if only the Roman Empire would go away, everyone would be fine. But we've had one empire after another. How come there's always another empire? It's like, is there something wrong with us or them or what? So that's why I use the term civilization, because they're catching the great control of civilization that they know about. They're not worrying about the Chinese, or for that matter, the Irish. What they know about the nations, as they call them, the nations, the others, is they're always coming after us. When empires are on a north-south axis between Mesopotamia and Egypt, guess who's in the middle?
Yeah.
Change the axis to east-west, Parthians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Parthians. Guess who's still in the middle?
They're always there.
Is there something wrong with my term now, civilization?
Okay.
They might say with quotation marks, this world.
Okay.
Is there something wrong with, but there can't be something wrong with this world because God created it. Yeah, but there's something wrong with it. So that's really the biblical challenge, that we live in this world,
Yeah.
which on the one hand God created, and God is just in their theology, but our experience is in an unjust world, again and again and again.
Mhm.
So what you have to see behind Rome is, I would say, I call it the normalcy of civilization. Because if Rome goes away, there'll probably be another one.
Yeah. Right.
So bigger than Rome. That's why it means civilization.
That's really helpful too. So then, if we're talking about the Jews' experience with Rome in terms of their history, what about their teachings through the Hebrew scriptures? Is there something about that Jewish context that brings a particular approach to Rome?
It does absolutely for me, because the dominant, I would say, theology throughout the Hebrew scriptures. I'm just looking at them, say up to the first century. We're not looking at the Mishnah or the Talmuds or anything else.
Yeah.
It's what I would call Deuteronomic theology. You get it in the book of Deuteronomy, the second telling of the law, and you see it especially in chapter 28. If you obey the Lord your God, all will go well here on earth.
Yeah.
If you disobey the Lord your God, all will go bad here on earth. Now, that pretty much worked for a long time. It really did. It seemed to be a good way to understand history. We must have sinned, along come the Assyrians.
Yeah.
We must have sinned, along come the Babylonians. After a while, people began to say, well, it's always us that are sinning. Wait a minute. How come we're getting beaten up by
all the time?
all the time for our sins? Why don't they get beaten up every now and then? So when the Jewish Bible is put together after the Babylonian exile, I don't know if your audience will know, the Babylonians conquered the Jewish homeland. Give me a round number, let me say 600 BCE, to keep a round number. And it looked like they took the entire aristocracy, not just the ordinary people, but the aristocracy, the government, let me put it bluntly. They took the whole government into exile in Babylon. And you probably would have said to yourself, that's the end. It's over. The land will just be taken over by others and the government is gone. And then the extraordinary thing, within the lifetime of many of those people, the Persians arrived. And the Persians had a new foreign policy. They had invented the Marshall Plan a little ahead of the time. Their theory was, no, we don't go out every spring and loot you. We put you back on your feet. We support you to get your government back, your law, right? Then you'd pay us taxes.
Okay.
We don't do loot, we do taxation. It was a great big new invention. Kind of like America putting Germany or Japan back on its feet after the war, rather than simply taking everything they could and running. So now all of a sudden you have at least a new vision. We have to put together our Bible. They've told us to put together our law. They're financing it, in fact. This is where you get chapter 1 in the Bible.
Okay.
This is where you get the Sabbath. And it's not the first chapter. It's the lens through which you're supposed to see the whole. It's like the way when I get to render unto Caesar, I don't write the prologue or the first.
This book you're talking about, right? Yeah. Okay.
Everyone writes the prologue last, right?
Yeah.
Because it tells you exactly what you're going to see.
Yeah.
Which maybe you didn't know, but you didn't.
Right.
So now we have this new vision. There's a Sabbath. God has created the world for the Sabbath. Even God couldn't skip it. He couldn't start working on a Wednesday and keep going all the way through till Tuesday. So you have this magnificent vision of the Sabbath rules creation. Kind of almost rules God. It's kind of like God's character. So what's the Sabbath about? It's about justice. It's about the fair distribution of the world for everyone. That's why you have a Sabbath day, a Sabbath year, a Sabbath jubilee, and again and again and again. It's about the fair distribution of the world for everyone.
So let me stop you for just 1 second and get something clear here, because it might be confusing for people. You're saying that this idea of the Sabbath, which comes in the first few books of the Bible, people who read the Bible from beginning to the end might not think of Genesis and Leviticus and Exodus and Leviticus coming so much later, but you're saying it came around the time of the Babylonians and their exile. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'm only talking about Genesis chapter 1, or if you want to be specific, it's 1:1 to about 2.4a. It's what we call the first account of creation. We're not talking about Adam and Eve in the garden, all the rest. We're talking about the first chapter, basically.
So the Sabbath,
everything else was there.
And the Sabbath is in that first chapter.
That's where the Sabbath comes in. And there's nothing in that first chapter about, and if you don't obey the Lord your God, you're going to get punished.
Right.
It identifies human. Let me back up a bit. The people who wrote that chapter could have imagined God saying, "Let there be a world." Of course.
Yeah.
God didn't require a week like to work on it. So putting God actually working for a week, and especially inventing a week, as it were, is to tell you that not even God can skip the Sabbath, as it were.
Okay.
Yeah. God couldn't just go right ahead. I'm going to take 8 days. Nope. God's got to be finished for the Sabbath rest. So the Sabbath rest rules the world.
Okay.
Well, what does that mean? It means go read the Sabbath day. The decrees of the Sabbath day is everyone gets a rest 1 day a week, not just the mother and father in the household, but the children and the slaves and the servants and the draft animals get a day off. Now, there's nothing there about you get a day off to go to church or the synagogue or anything else. You get a day off because before you even get to education or welfare or health, rest. Everyone, even your draft animals, has a right to a rest. That means that the metronome of the world beats to distributive justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a completely different vision from the normalcy of civilization, which basically says, I'm bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm stronger than you. I'm going to take your stuff. Do you have a problem with that? Or as the Greeks said, the stronger take what they want and the weaker suffer what they must. That's what I call the normalcy of civilization. Mm-hmm. Now, that's what the Sabbath is set on a collision course with.
So the distributive justice is coming from the Sabbath, and that's what you're saying happened, or they were discussing that during the time of I'm trying to put Babylon in context with what you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The Persians,
they
weren't just doing this with Israel. The Persian policy was all you conquered people and battered down people, we're setting you back up again. We're even financing you a bit. You put your own people in charge. Get your own laws together. Get your constitutions going. Get yourself operational. We'll be back once a year for taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a marvelous. It's much better than saying we'll be back each spring for loot.
Yeah, right.
So that was the policy. Now, here we are, we have our Bible, of course. We have long traditions. We're not inventing it all. But as we put it together, we're going to have to put up front a sort of a prologue, my term now, a prologue, an overture almost. And we want you to see the whole through these glasses.
Yeah.
They could have taken Leviticus 28 and put it up front. God runs the world by rewards and punishments. It said, God runs the world by distributive justice, and you are made in the image and likeness of God.
Okay.
Now, wait a minute. We're made in the image and likeness of God to run God's world for distributive justice. Excuse me, God, what if we don't do it? Nobody asked that question.
Yeah.
Well, will we be punished? No. But this is your identity. This is your destiny, to run the world for distributive justice. What if we don't? Well, let me answer for God. If you went up to the 30th story of a building, if such existed, and thought you were a bird, what do you think would happen? No, I wouldn't punish you. I wouldn't reward you. This is your destiny. This is your identity. Do what you want with it, but it won't work any other way. It will not work any other way. I don't have to punish you. There are consequences built in. So here's your world. I'm telling you, it'll only work, as it were. Allow me all the personifications. I will tell you, says God, it'll only work because that's the way it's made. That's my character. That's my identity as God. So you do whatever you want with it. It's as if I bought a new car and I have my owner's manual that tells me what to do. And I don't think this oil stuff, I don't think I really need oil. That's just making money. I'll skip oil. Then when the car is ruined, don't blame the company that sold you the car. That's the consequences of refusing to accept identity and destiny. So I see that as the guiding vision now in the Bible. It's much more powerful than the older one of punishments. It's about consequences.
So then going back to Jesus, then do you feel like you're telling us that this is the vision that Jesus is wanting to uphold? Like it's not a new thing to him, but this is the vision that he's defending in the place of the new world that he was living in with the Romans?
Well, yes, but trying to understand what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to imagine, we might say, God appeared to Jesus and told him this. Yeah, that doesn't help me at all. Mm-hmm. How did God do it? I want to know. So I understand that there is an option for nonviolent resistance alive with Jesus. Jesus pushes that, though. Mm-hmm. In what we call the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says the reason we do nonviolent resistance, I am not sure, to be honest with you, why another Jewish scholar or sage fostering it. What's their theology? I don't know this. I am not presuming what it is. Mm-hmm. It could equally well be that God is nonviolent. That's the way Jesus, I think, and John the Baptist before him. Mm-hmm. They don't just do it as a prudent way because you don't want to take on the legions. So don't take on the legions. Try this nonviolent stuff and they won't know what to do with you. Somebody might come up with that.
Yeah.
But Jesus's reason is if you want to be children of God, God doesn't punish the just and the unjust. He gives them all rain. He brings up the sun and the good and the bad. That's not the way Deuteronomy saw the world. God doesn't bring up the sun for the good and the bad. He brings drought, it says it explicitly, brings up drought for the bad and sunny days for the good. So Jesus grounds clearly his theology. And again, I repeat, the questions we have to be asking of the fourth philosophy of Josephus, the questions we should be asking as both Jewish scholars and Christian scholars today. What's the theology behind it? For example, when Caligula tries to put a statue in the temple of Jerusalem and thousands of men, women, and children sit down and say, if you try to take this statue past Galilee, you're going to have to kill us. No, we won't fight you, but no, we won't allow it. You could say, what's their theology? And that's a perfectly good question. And their theology could be, God will never allow us to be martyred. It will be that maybe we'll be martyred. And then this is a valid question. And since I'm watching Jesus within the Jewishness, I'm asking that question myself very much.
Yeah.
And I'm challenging Jewish scholars as well, and Christian scholars, to go into Josephus and to take seriously the nonviolent resistance that he calls the fourth philosophy. And he's really embarrassed by it. I mean, he's more embarrassed by nonviolent resistance than he is by violent resistance, because that's just violent resistance, what people do, and the Romans would just, send the legion, that it's over. It's tragic, but it's, it's life. But this other type of thing, he seems appalled by it. nonviolent resistance. That's what I really want to focus on, and Jesus within that.
Yeah, so helpful. You know, at the end of your book, you make a startling claim that I'd love for you to elaborate on, if you don't mind. I think that it can help us conclude this really thoughtful conversation here. You ask, what if, and I'm going to quote this here, what if, with all due and sincere respect, it is not just the arc of the ethical, but of the evolutionary universe that is long but bends toward justice? What did you mean?
It's something to really think about, not just the flag. Obviously, respect is for Martin Luther King Jr., who made the statement. I want to push it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I want to ask, is evolution against the normalcy of civilization? I really do.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that evolution, and by evolution, I mean what everyone means by evolution. I don't mean anything particular.
Okay.
It seems that evolution is ferociously fair to everything. I mean, I wouldn't be that fair. I don't think I wouldn't be fair to viruses. I'd probably kill them all. I'm not keen on volcanoes either. I'm not big on tornadoes. But all of it seems to be a part of a universe that has, I don't know, a fair share to be itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know, is there something, why do empires always end up gone, but keep coming back? I know Deuteronomic answers, of course, God punishes them. But now, could we leave God out for the moment and look at the more proximate phenomena, such as evolution? Are we, in setting up the opponents to distributive justice, not only setting up something against Genesis 1, if you will, but against evolution itself? That's the question. And it only gets to us at the moment when we know that our species, Homo sapiens, hilarious oxymoron, of course, because we are not sapiens. We're smart. We're terribly smart. But we're not sapiens. We're not really wise. We are intolerably smart. Have got ourselves into an awful mess. We came out of Africa and kind of declared war on ourselves, war, other species, and the world. And it has brought us to where we are today. And I caught early glimpses of warnings about this in the Jewish tradition, in a place like Genesis 1, before Jesus ever existed. I hear it from a Jesus. I hear it from a Paul. It's a warning that there's something profoundly wrong with the way we're running the world, if you will. And it's separate from somebody saying, well, you're just talking about God and the Bible and Jesus and Paul. And I don't care any of that stuff. I don't believe in it. Fine. I would want to talk to you about evolution.
Yeah.
If you say I don't believe in evolution, then I guess I don't know how to talk to you.
Right. Yeah.
I would back off and say, how are you on gravity?
You're right.
Could we agree on gravity and maybe work our way? But if we could talk about evolution, it's sometimes I wish that we could leave out the theism against atheism or polytheism against monotheism and say, whatever, could we agree that whatever you think about God, could we agree that what is operational is evolution? Now, how you handle a God whose operation by evolution, who seems to have a tremendous patience before we got here, but however, could we look at what we have done with the world, not just with ourselves, but with the whole world, and where we are today, and then look at what the Bible talks about when it talks about this world. And by this world, it means the mess they saw with the Roman Empire. That's what they're talking about. Yeah. If they talk about the world, that's much more the world of creation. God so loved the world, we say. Okay, must be good then. God so loved the world. But then you look at all those other places in the Bible where this world seems to be an evil place. Can it make up its mind?
Yeah.
That's what I mean with the world of creation and the world of civilization. Or if you want to put it bluntly, what we've done to the world.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone who can't see it today, then I would tell them just to watch the evening news.
Oh, dear. Well, I obviously we could talk to you for hours because this is just a fascinating and deep, thoughtful, and important subject. But I think what we're going to do is let people be inspired to read your book because it's so thoughtful, so encouraging to get a big picture where Jesus is in this acculturation question. And I think that does fit into this whole understanding of how do we see Jesus in his Jewish world and in the world itself. And I love the way you conclude by putting it in the whole evolutionary picture of its own. This is a huge question. So I think you've just gotten started. You have so much more to say, and you've got many other books people could read to find out more about what you're thinking about. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Be sure to check out the details from this episode from the show notes on the website earlychristiantexts.com, or just come browse around on the website to find all the other resources provided for you there. Also, we ask for your support to keep producing these podcast interviews. Please consider becoming a supporting member of our Patreon page at patreon.com/BibleandBeyond. And we love hearing from you on the Facebook page at Early Christian Texts or Twitter at EarlyXIAN Texts. Be sure to come back next month for our next episode on Early Christian Texts, the Bible, and Beyond.